I also want to highlight that when we're in conversation, our ideas, especially around innovative new approaches to solve some of the world's greatest problems, mean that we are individually evolving in our own ideas, which means that we're sharing current states of knowledge and we're honing in on better states of knowledge through our partnership with each of you. We are looking for ways to learn from each other. If you hear something that you want to engage in discussion, please raise your hand or write in chat. If we are unable to engage your voice in this format, please reach out to us through Ezra or Alexandra or myself, and we'll try to follow up with your questions so that we can all learn together. So our ideas and thoughts and views may also not be representative of the school, the Heller Schools views, nor the universities, but we are all trying to move forward to hone in on ways to equitably address inequity, especially in the space of racial justice and tech policy. As a part of launching us, I'd like to share our evolving land acknowledgement statement, which has been changing over time and likely will change as we move forward. But this is our current land acknowledgement. The Heller School of Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University acknowledges our occupation of Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Pawtucket homelands and territories. We recognize that the very existence of our university in Waltham has been facilitated by the dispossession, enslavement, forced removal, and dispersal of Native communities by settler colonialism. We acknowledge that that allotment of Native lands and termination of Native sovereignty emerged in New England during the Massachusetts Enfranchisement and Allotment Act of 1866. And we recognize that this land acknowledgement is but one aspect of our ongoing effort to take action to support Indigenous communities. At Heller, we recognize the critical role we must play in repairing our relationships with local Native communities and with the land. We seek to understand the long-standing history of our occupation of this land, and we strive to amplify Native narratives, honor and respect Native sovereignty and cultural rights, and strengthen our relationships with local communities and organizations, and we do so with sincere reverence, humility, and gratitude. And we hope we carry those themes through in our racial and ethnic justice tech policy program and work throughout the year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Janelle Ridley.
Thank you, Dr. Madison. And I am just going to share sort of our conversation for today and introduce all of our guest speakers. So thank you everyone for being here with us today. And I am really excited to have a conversation with incredible people who are boots on the ground or in the field of education and really looking at the past and future of what education in America looks like, considering we are in this fourth industrial revolution period. And so today we have, as you just heard from Dr. Maria Madison, who is the interim dean. She is a trained global public health researcher and has been with the Center since 2017. So in a background, she holds her doctoral degree in population and international health from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. She joined Brandeis she brings over 2 decades of experience to the Heller community, designing, implementing, and managing various projects and studies, including clinical drug trials and registries, where she oversaw large, complex, multinational teams. Dr. Madison succeeded David Whale as the Heller School Interim Dean on July 1st of 2022. She previously served as Heller's Associate Dean for Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, and the Director of the Institute for Economic and Racial Equity. We also have Dr. Alexandra Pinheiro Shields joining our conversation today. She She was a visiting associate professor of the practice of racial equity, and she is currently our Master in Public Policy Director. She brings over 30 years of experience working to advance oppressed communities with human and civil rights through innovative practices that create spaces and processes for deep, meaningful civic participation and democratic decision-making. Before joining the Heller faculty, Dr. Shields was the executive director of the Essex County Community Organization, an interfaith, interracial, and interclass network of 40 congregations whose mission is racial and social economic justice. During her tenure as executive director, she transformed the 40-year-old organization into one guided by womanist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist democratic operating principles that center Blacks and Latinos in all levels of organizational decision-making. We also have Sheriff Steve Tompkins joining us today. He was appointed by former Governor Deval Patrick in 2013 to serve as the sheriff of Suffolk County. In November, he was reelected to office in 2022 and 2016. As the sheriff of Suffolk County, Tompkins manages all operations at the Suffolk County House of Correction, the Suffolk County Jail, and the Civil Process Division. In addition to providing care, custody, and rehabilitative support for inmates and pretrial detainees, Tompkins oversees a management, security, and administrative staff of nearly 1,000 individuals. I will also be joining the conversation today. I am currently a doctoral student at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management. I have founded the educational organization, Affirmation Education, that works with young adults. I have experience working with young people from all regions and backgrounds for over 20 years. But prior to this, I was working for Mayor Michelle Wu in the Community Engagement and Public Safety Office, leading initiatives that were centered around young people and their families. And I also served as the Master in Public Concentration Chair at Brandeis in 2020 to 2021 at the University of Brandeis. We also have Dr. Ezra Tafara joining us today. He is a medical doctor and health policy researcher with 6 years of experience in both clinical and non-clinical settings. In his current role as the leader of the Racial Justice Tech Policy Program, Dr. Tafara is dedicated to exploring the intersection of technology and racial justice, with a focus on understanding the effects of structural racism on population health and the association of algorithmic bias and racial oppression in the healthcare system. He also seeks to examine how health and technology tools and healthcare data analytics can be leveraged to shed light on the impacts of these technologies. With an impressive academic and leadership background, Dr. Tafara is committed to developing a deeper understanding of emerging technologies such as AI from a diverse and inclusive perspective. I'm also excited to share we have two young presenters, Kalia Castillo, who is in her last year at Alabama A&M, and she's serving as a research intern for the Heller School for Social Policy and Management. And we have Isaiah Young, a recent grad from Danvers High School, who will be attending UMass Amherst in the fall as a freshman and is also serving as a research intern for the Heller School. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to our first speaker, which is Dr. Madison.
Thank you. So I'm going to now sort of transition over to a bit of a background for racial justice, tech policy, and why now. And to do so, I'd like to invite you to write in chat what I like to refer to as a waterfall. If you have thoughts, ideas, or questions, please feel free to enter them in chat. Or again, feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. In as much as possible, we'll try to answer questions or add thoughts as we go. But now more than ever is what we could refer to as an inflection point or a threshold shock. We could think of it as such because there are so many things that we're confronting, not the least of which include the Supreme Court decisions coming from last week related to whether businesses can deny protected class populations service, which harkens back to the 1960s, right? And sitting at a soda fountain counter and being thrown out if you were African American. And yet last week, a very similar Supreme Court decision passed that opened the floodgate for discrimination of a protected class, LGBTQIA in particular. Or the rollback of affirmative action. Those are inflection points of our time, along with major concerns and challenges of climate change and so much in our society. At the center of it is that various question, that specific question of who has access, equitable access to resources. Who are we and how are we situated in society? We could describe it as underpinning all the great challenges of our time. There's the human drama, the human condition, and the demographic shift. I would argue that what's behind a lot of the decisions we're seeing and a lot of the disparities we're seeing really are centered around this demographic shift, which refers to, if you will, a majority-minority population. What does it mean to be a minority population if the minority population is increasingly white? So when we say the word minoritized, it actually isn't referring to numbers, it's referring to how someone's treated. So no longer a noun, but more like a verb. Minoritized populations as growing in the society to represent the majority of the population. And what that shift does to how policies are determined and how those policies impact differentially Black or white folks or marginalized groups. And so as we move beyond 2020, we seek to understand that puzzle of being ourselves, of rising to our best capacities and gifts in all of our complexity and strangeness, hoping that we each have equal, if not equitable, opportunities to reach our highest potential. So at the center of that is education in America. In one hand, or in one sense, you could say, when we say education in America, we literally mean knowledge that helps us understand how we should have access, equitable access to all resources, regardless of where we live, eat, pray, or play. And that is throughout our life course, that our quality of life should be equitably dispersed throughout society, and that equity shouldn't begin at birth. Often that equity should have been a part of our lineage, of what we inherit, of what determines where we live throughout our life course and the life course of the generations before and after us. So at the root cause of understanding education in America and how we're situated is understanding where we come from and how our ancestors or previous generations were either better or worse situated to help us get a leg up in life. Once that basic platform is established, then we can imagine that we would have a society that would afford us with equitable access to quality education. And quality education would mean that everyone has access to high quality education or knowledge. What we know in this country through the work of so many researchers is that that isn't the case. Through the work of the Kapor Foundation, for example, and some of their data, there's about a $23 billion differential between the federal investment in school systems in white districts as compared to Black districts. Others have disaggregated that and shown there's probably about a $2,000 difference per student in the quality of investment in Black school districts as compared to white school districts. So we already know by looking at the root causes of differentials in knowledge access and knowledge production, there's already differential beginning often at birth and then over the life course. If we're fortunate, we can find our way into higher ed. If we're fortunate, we would be given the same equitable opportunity to have an equitable chance at getting access to quality higher ed. So we know that's not the case. Going back to the root cause, we know that there's still segregation, de facto, de jure segregation that differentially funds health education systems as well as health systems, housing, employment, et cetera, et cetera. And that disparate funding makes it difficult to get equitable life course. And I look at these things through the lens of public health. And so a lot of this is a parallel framework that is represented through the social drivers of health. If all of that went well for everybody, then everyone would have an opportunity to perform their best on standardized tests. Everyone would have an opportunity, perhaps, to compete against what are referred to as legacy students who get preferential treatment in access to higher ed. But instead, that was not the case. The eventuality and the creation of affirmative action tried to level the opportunities to higher ed, and in so doing, tried to create a Band-Aid that said, we know these other root causes of inequity in society have not been addressed, so therefore affirmative action was created. When we see the rollback of affirmative action, it's literally begging us to ask whether anyone who created that rollback of affirmative action made a case that we'd already achieved equity in housing, education, health, and healthcare that would have allowed for an equitable access to higher ed. The rollback instead was a function of policies and the courts involved in a bias on the belief of what it takes to get to higher ed and equitable access to quality education. So why this conversation at Heller? Heller's motto, and Heller represents a school for social policy and management. In order to assure that we create equitable societies, we need to assure that we promote an understanding of how to create policies that address the root causes of why inequity exists to begin with. Those root causes that set us up differentially in our communities across different pathways of what we've inherited or what we've been addressing over generations in our families and our communities. So what we'd like to do through Heller is to try to create equitable access to knowledge, equitable access to influencing policy and policymakers. So an important aspect of all of this is technology. This is an example of the way in which policy and technology are influencing us today. This was an article in the Washington Post this morning that highlighted that right now, in the midst of all the urgencies of our time, is also the role of upcoming elections, and that our elections are going to be influenced by AI, artificial intelligence. And that now more than ever, as communities gain access to broadband, for example, they're also gaining access potentially to fake news, different ways in which we view how politics are playing out and influencing our life course. And in this example, you can see that the Republican National Committee released an ad showing former President Trump hugging Anthony Fauci. Of course, this never happened, but the DeSantis committee wanted to put out false ads on President Trump. And so what the Washington Post went on to say is that there are plenty of reasons to worry about what artificial intelligence will do to our democracy. and that we need to be paying attention, and we need to train an interdisciplinary, multicultural, intergenerational group of people to understand this as we increasingly try to expose, or are exposing, people to broadband and access to the internet. We need to increase knowledge. And the Washington Post goes on to say that Congress is working on broadband frameworks to regulate AI, but that will take months or even years. We can argue that we don't have months or even years, that we need to make sure that we create an equitable access to education that includes knowledge about the role of algorithms and bias in both good ways and dangerous ways in our life course. We could summarize the problem statement as technology transitions have a history of leaving disparate, underserved, minoritized populations behind. Fundamentally, in the words of Bardia Nazati, we're in the midst of, and I think that Janelle mentioned this earlier, a fourth industrial revolution, this convergence of and the interaction between emerging technologies. Unlike the three industrial revolutions that came before, the steam and water power, electricity and assembly lines and computerization, this industrial revolution is unfolding within and around us, pushing beyond new forms of mechanization and challenging our ideas about what it means to be human. I could add to that, not just what it means to be human, but what it means to have your human rights respected equitably throughout your life course. So the problem, again, then, is technology transitions have a history of leaving minoritized populations behind, and that has profound impacts on underserved populations' quality and quantity of life across generations. And those benefiting the least from tech advances are underrepresented in tech-related jobs and overrepresented in the negative effects of technology. Our program in racial justice tech policy isn't saying everyone needs to go out and become programmers, but we hope that we reduce the anxiety of wanting to learn and understand what algorithms are and how they're related to all aspects of our life course, what happens from us from birth to death, but also what happened to our previous generations and how that informs our opportunities. So our fundamental movement, if you will, is our need to build a tech-savvy, diverse workforce and fight bias. We hope that we entice and grow access to quality education, that we entice and grow an interdisciplinary, multicultural pipeline of increasingly knowledgeable populations. Our learning objective is to understand algorithms and bias. And we hope that we abate the role of algorithmic bias through skill building and experience. We looked for research training in best practices related to tech interventions, countering that algorithmic bias, and also working with students, whether they're through the pipeline of undergrad all the way through graduate and doctoral students, learning how to write policy proposals in interdisciplinary fields based on the research that they either do themselves or that they look at through peer-reviewed publications and other sources to discern quality to advance policy that creates equitable access and knowledge of the role of algorithms and bias in our lives. And that we want to make sure that access to this information or this educational approach is affordable and equitable opportunities for evidence of skills and credentialing are created. And we do that by not only providing workshops, but the opportunity to receive certificates, and those certificates can be stacked up to create micro-credentials, skills, evidence of skills you can put on a resume that will help give you an edge in any type of job that you would be interested in the future. But it should also help in helping control the influences of what you're reading and seeing online. So what's our approach? Our team has created a diagram, a menu of academic opportunities to advance knowledge on racial justice and tech policy. Everything from our building block courses, which we piloted last year on Racial Justice Tech Policy 101 with Gabrielle Hibbert and Lily Gambas from Cape Coral, to artificial intelligence and machine learning and anti-bias with Professor Bill Crown. We also offer soft skill credentials or understanding on topics that you'll hear more about from both Janelle and Ezra, all the way through to recommended courses and understanding assaults on larger scales, whether it's Holocaust and mass atrocities, to also understanding anti-racism more in depth. And then we provide workshops on hard skill credentials that offer hard skill credentials on geographic information systems with Professor Ravi Lakshmakantham, digital culture, and data analytics. I will say that we also teach knowledge about, as well as interventions to promote, cultural humility. And often that's referred to as competency, but I am trained in recognizing the importance of knowing that we can never be fully competent in understanding what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. So we aim to promote cultural humility and knowledge in recognizing the full agency of others. I'm going to pause and thank each of you for joining this conversation. Our work has been sponsored by a larger movement through the Caper Foundation, for which Brandeis is a part of the building infrastructure and co-creating capacity arm of the work. And we're excited to be on this journey together. With that, I'm going to pause, see if there are any questions, and then turn it over to my colleague, Janelle. And if there aren't any questions, and seeing no questions, I do invite you to reach out to me at any time to further the conversation or investigate any of our program. But thank you, everyone, and thank you, Janelle.
Thank you, Dr. Madison, for sharing all of that information. And I hope everyone enjoyed hearing sort of where we are with things. And so I am going to be turning it over to Dr. Alexandra Pinheiro-Shields.
Hello, everyone. It is good to see you. I want to start off by thanking the Racial Justice and Tech Policy team, Maria Madison, Ezra Tefera, and Janelle Ridley, for inviting me to share some thoughts today. I wanted to start off by saying that my analysis is rooted in my experience as a Latina immigrant who has succeeded in the educational system in this country, in spite of the educational system in this country. And I chose to describe my talk as using the words of two of my most inspiring and favorite educators, Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks, who talk about education as the practice of freedom. So I want to make three arguments today. First, I want to talk about our educational system as an import of European imperialist structure. I want to talk about the Supreme Court Justice's decision as a challenge to democracy. And then I want to end by talking a little bit about why diversity is in the common good. So the Supreme Court's decision is a decision to maintain a European imperial import that seeks to replicate European hierarchical relationships, right? Those relationships were about white supremacy, cis heteronormative patriarchy, Christian hegemony, and a feudal economic order that reserved education for the sons of elite noble families. And what we have inherited and what we have maintained until today is essentially an educational system that is a pillar, a foundational pillar of upholding maybe not a noble class or a monarchy, but certainly a capitalist elite class, a 1%. And we can take the recent work of Greek economist Yanou Varoufakis, who talks about the stage of capitalism that we are entering as techno-feudalism. So kind of bridging the talk with Dean Madison's wonderful overview of technology, he talks about us entering a time of an economic system that is a techno-feudalism. There are many works within the academy that take on white supremacy in our educational system. This is an excellent text, White Logic, White Methods, but there are many others. Second point, the Supreme Court's decision is a challenge to democracy, right? We have an educational system that privileges economic elites, both in the US and internationally, right? That come into foreign students from elite 1% of other countries. And we know that there is affirmative action in higher ed admissions for children of alumni, right? We call it legacy, and for males, because it has been the case that girls perform better on standardized tests and GPA, high school GPAs, although there's a lot to unpack there. And as you know, the Supreme Court chose to maintain affirmative action in the armed forces, academies. And there's a really important question to ask. It's okay for us to put our bodies on the line, but not to develop our brains, right? So we could talk a lot more about that. So I think that by preventing access to knowledge, we are in essence preventing access to power for people of color, for students of color. And what's really frightening, as if this wasn't enough to be scared and concerned, and that there is likely to be a ripple effect, right? That there can be legal challenges to race forward policies in other fields. For example, I am on the board of several philanthropies, and that there has been a conversation over the last few months as we awaited this case to be announced of challenges to race forward philanthropy. In the city of Lowell here in Massachusetts, the city has engaged over the last few years in a restructuring of its voting system so that different ethnic and racial groups in the city are represented on the city council. Such efforts in our voting system are also being dismantled. I want to say a little bit about power. So I use, and those of you who have had me in class, you will have seen this, but John Gaventa's brilliant framework for understanding power. In the first dimension, you have winners and losers. So in an election, a candidate wins, for example, and a candidate loses. In the second dimension is the rules of the game that will dictate who wins and who loses at the first dimension. So in our election example, it would be gerrymandering or other voter suppression laws. And then the third dimension of power is about the national myths or public discourses a society has that justifies who wins and who loses at the third level. So the American dream, pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, those types of images. In the case of our election example, it would be the idea of democracy, that the United States is a democracy, right? That we're a functioning democracy, that we're in fact the best democracy in the world, which justifies all of the racialized impacts of our voting system. So I would suggest that affirmative action is a first dimension power policy. It is an important policy, but it has not, well, it hasn't actually worked as effectively as we had hoped. And it actually doesn't touch the other two dimensions. And I am interested in creating a educational system that actually challenges the second and third dimensions of power, that completely changes the way we understand human learning. For example, right, we talk about knowledge as academic knowledge, even if we don't qualify it as such, but we rarely consider experience, what people learn from living, from failing and from succeeding, as knowledge. We don't talk about knowledge as the cultural practices and wisdoms that different communities have passed down from generation to generation. I would like to see an educational system where there is no hierarchy of knowledge, right? That all of these are accepted as valid and true knowledge. And finally, diversity. There has been so much research that suggests that diverse groups of people, and by diversity, I mean diversity in every sense that you can think of, not just racial diversity, is a really important element for learning and for innovative problem solving. One of the best examples is from MIT. Dr. Janice Perlin, quite a few decades ago, created the Megacities Project, and I suggest that you take a look. But in her work, bringing together leaders from megacities, so cities around the world that have 8 million, 10 million, 20 million people, and have really kind of intractable problems such as climate, pollution, traffic, health, bringing leaders together across cities, megacities, to problem solve. And in her research, one of the main themes of her project is the evidence that the more diverse a team, the more likely you are to have a really innovative and sustainable solution. Right now, we're in an existential crisis, right? We're seeing the rise of Christo-fascism. You could call it totalitarian, an authority state, a police state, authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it, and also climate catastrophe. And so we need diversity, and the Supreme Court's decision is going to be a real blow to solving some of these existential crises that we're in. I just wanted to say the last few words about some space for hope. So in the late 60s, or maybe was it early 70s, Thomas Kuhn published The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, a brilliant book in which he coined the term paradigm shift. And when he was looking at the history of scientific discovery, he described this moment in which the prevailing scientific theory stopped explaining, or was unable to explain any number of empirical realities. And so after a time, the theory was pushed aside because it no longer explain the world around the people in that era. And before a new scientific theory could be developed, there was a time of chaos and uncertainty. And then after that time, then there was the production of a new scientific theory that could encompass all of the empirical reality that scientists were looking at. And so this idea of a paradigm shift that he coined has both the death of one system, chaos, and then the birth of a new system. And so I believe we are in this moment of chaos, that our higher ed is in real trouble. We're not going to go into that because it's too close to home. So we're in a moment of chaos and the potential to create a new system that understands human learning in a very different way, not in a way that is feudal, that is white supremacist, that is patriarchal. And two of the authors that I love that helped me think about what education could be is Bell Hooks in her brilliant book, Teaching to Transgress: Education as the Practice of Freedom, where she talks about a shifting of power to be a horizontal power structure and not hierarchical like higher ed is, both in a university system, but also in a classroom, and a place where people can learn together, that the professors learn with students, students learn with professors, and that there's a space for wonder and a space for love and care. Laura Rendon has this brilliant new book, Senti Pensante, Sensing Thinking Pedagogy, and she talks about wholeness and social justice as central to our educational system. I think we need an educational system that is inclusive, not only of our bodies, not only that I could be a student at Brandeis, right? An educational system that is inclusive not only of our bodies, but also of our experience, of our culture, and of our souls. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pinheiro-Shields, for all of that information. And I think it's a great conversation to continue with Sheriff Tompkins, and how all of this conversations impact the work that he does and what he has seen from his end with the over 1,000 employees he has, but also the several hundreds of residents he has within both of his facilities in South Bay and Nashua Street. So Sheriff Tompkins, we thank you for joining the conversation today, and would just really like to hear from you regarding how you see the decision regarding affirmative action continuing to impact the cradle or school to prison pipeline, and what you think that means for the work that you do and need to do moving forward. You're still muted, Sheriff, so if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I can't see you, so I'm having some technical difficulties. I don't know if you can see me, but as long as you can hear me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your folk about this very serious situation about the prison to pipeline, or pipeline of schools to prison, and so on and so forth. What we deal with on a daily basis at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department and throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is that we have a cohort of individuals that have come to us with a 6th or 7th grade reading and a mathematics acumen. And so they are having a real difficult time elevating themselves educationally. And so what we try to do when you come into our facility is to find out what your educational needs are and help you move throughout your time at the facility to really kind of strengthen you academically, if that makes sense to you. We've gotten a number of our kids into Roxbury Community College and Bunker Hill and a couple of the other community colleges. Insofar as the affirmative action situation is concerned, I'm deeply troubled by the Supreme Court's decision on this particular issue. I myself benefited from affirmative action, as did Justice Thomas, who greatly benefited from affirmative action. And so eliminating that or trying to curtail it is going to have a very negative effect. But I will also say this, insofar as getting rid of affirmative action is concerned, the next thing I want to see happen is the legacy programs at several of the institutions of higher learning. So if you're going to take away one, then I think you should take away the other. I mean, if we're talking about equity and fairness for people getting educated, I think we have to, play on the board that speaks to equity, and what we find is that by eliminating affirmative action, there are so many things that are going to have such a negative impact, not just educationally, on folk of color and folk from that lower economic spectrum.
Thank you, Sheriff. The other thing I wanted to point out is you mentioned that most of the individuals within your care and custody have a seventh grade level of education. Can you speak about some of the generational cycles you have seen come through your facility as well, and where the K through 12 education systems have failed? Just generations of family that have come through your facility or that you are aware of through other sheriffs and your colleagues' facilities, and what that even, the potential risk that even looks like for higher ed trajectory for many of the folks that come through your system, but also their kids, the ones that are parents and have kids in the K through 12 system, and what that potentially means for them.
So there are several tenets there that have led to folk being incarcerated. First off, poverty, which is a big nut to crack. When you have a number of individuals that have come from a single parent household, as I did when I was a child, if mom has 2 or 3 jobs, 2 or 3 kids, sometimes what happens is these kids get out into the street, looking for friends, looking for family, looking for acceptance. And once the streets get a hold of some of these kids, really, we have found that bad things have happened. More bad things than good things have happened when the streets kind of governs an individual's life. On average, people that have come to our facility, to a carceral facility, tell us that they've dropped out of school in the 6th grade. Our public school system, not just here in the Commonwealth, but I dare say across the nation, is deplorable. Sure, there are some schools that are better than others, but when you look at the urban schools versus the suburban schools, we have found that the suburban schools have been offered their kids more opportunities for growth, more opportunities to get a quality education. That has not always been the case in some of your more urbane schools. When you ask about the generational cycle, we have had grandfathers, fathers, and grandsons incarcerated with us at the same time. Years ago, I spoke to a young man that kept coming back, kept recidivating. And I asked him, I said, what is the problem? Why do you keep coming back? And what he said to me was, he says, listen, I totally understand that criminality is a negative way to lead one's life. But he said that his father and his grandfather were both in the life, meaning that they also dealt in the criminalistic world. And he says, this is all I know how to do. This is all I know how to do. This is what puts food on the table and clothes on my kid's back, which was heart-wrenching. It was gut-wrenching to hear him say that his only alternative for taking care of himself and his family was to commit crime. And so as a society, we really need to, and your folk have talked about this, we need to get our arms around what it is that we're doing with principally our Black and brown and our lower income folk, if we are to be that thriving global education entity. And I think that we are falling down the ladder when you talk about how we educate or not our kids. And so it's a really sad situation. And I'll stop by saying this. Clearly, there's not equity in who goes to jail or who goes to prison. What I mean by that is we've had white folk that have dealt powdered cocaine, that have gotten a light sentence. We've had Black and brown individuals that have dealt rock cocaine, and they have gotten upwards of 10, 15, 20, sometimes more years than that. Where's the equity there? Where's the fairness there? And what we often tell our kids is when you fall into the criminal justice system, it's really hard trying to get out of the criminal justice system. And when you do get out, getting money to go to school, getting a job, finding housing is even more difficult. And so these are the things to know that we try to address with our population.
Can I ask, Steve, have you seen programs that have provided promise in disrupting the generational trend?
We have a program at my facility, and several of the other sheriffs in the Commonwealth have that. Well, actually, across the country, it's not a lot of us, but a few of us. We have a program called the Peace Program, where we have removed a high percentage of our 18 to 24-year-old individuals out of what we call general population. And we put them in another part of the facility to address the issue that the mind, the brain, rather, is still developing. And with that, what we say to these young men and women, actually, because I have a small contingent of women in my facility, is that we're going to meet you where you're at.
Right.
We're going to. You haven't deeply fallen into the criminal, and I call it criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system, because if you don't have the fiscal wherewithal or the relationships, you're not necessarily going to get justice. But what we try to do is break that cycle before they get deeply ingrained in that. And we've actually had some really good success with that, getting our kids, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, into more of the community colleges versus four-year schools. But that's just one instance of some of the things that we're trying to do in an carceral setting to work with.
I think that's a part of what our hopes are. I know that community colleges, to Professor Pinheiro-Shields' point, there are headwinds for higher ed, and community colleges are suffering dramatically in many areas. And then, this whole issue of rolling back affirmative action puts that problem even more front and center. So, I think for our program, with evidence from work with Janelle over the last couple of years, is working with criminal and justice system involved youth to gain access to knowledge about their rights, to gain access to, in this program, certificates through online learning. Yeah, that sort of thing. Does that seem like it's in the right direction from from your vantage point, from what you see?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing about the community colleges is that they place a pretty significant, or some of them do, emphasis on vocational education.
Right.
Here's an individual may not be that strong academically.
Right.
They are wildly proficient when you talk about being in the trades. And so what we do is we have the trades, most of the unions come into our facility to hold seminars with the individual with us before they leave, to get them interested in apprenticeships. And I don't know, the last time you had a carpenter or a plumber at your house, they make a nice salary.
Exactly.
So we focus mightily on voc ed as well as academic track.
So my last question then is, in addition to that, part of our paradigm shift, again, going back to Dr. Pinheiro-Shields' presentation, is that regardless of whether those individuals are focusing on, a vocation, plumbing, etc., regardless of what one chooses, we are increasingly engaged in knowledge through the internet. Knowledge through, all the time we spend online, our cell phones, totally down those rabbit holes. So do you see the kinds of training about algorithms and bias as being an essential part to, in parallel, getting that education, through vocational schools or higher ed, whatever the choice may be, as being as important?
I think it's crucially important. In fact, inside of my facility and others in the Commonwealth, we teach individuals how to really work with a computer. First, a lot of them come in having some knowledge of work their telephones, but not realizing that you can do the same thing, if not more, on your computer, and how you can work within that social framework, that social media framework, to be positive and do productive things, particularly with that cohort, that 18 to 24-year-old cohort, because the brain looking for avenues for success, frankly.
Right.
So
But-
as many ways that we can do that, we do. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the carceral system is not like it was 40, 50 years ago, where a guy or lady is committed their, have paid their debt to society and leave. We
Right.
can't do that any longer. We have to prepare folks to leave so that they can heighten their livelihood, frankly. So we teach a wide array of courses that speak to a number of things that's going on in the real world outside of the carceral setting. But one of the things that we found is we were able to get individuals on jobs, but a lot of the folk with us had never worked on a professional job site, so they did not know how to comport themselves professionally. And I'm talking about things like as simple as punctuality, getting to work on time, having a kind of an attitude that speaks to the fact that if you have a boss that may give you what you think is a hard way to go, you don't just get to snap back at that person because they'll show you the door.
Mhm.
And so as we try to, we have a class for anger management. We have a wide array of academic classes to really strengthen people. But here's the key also, we involve the families with
Mhm.
this. So just offering this to the individual is fine, but we find that if they have that family support, it strengthens them and the family. And we, from our vantage point, we'll see if you have a strong individual, hopefully that leads to a strong family, and a strong family leads to a strong community. And so these are the things, the gospel that we preach now, because we just can't have people pay their debt to society and walk out, because in the absence of education, housing, and healthcare, the likelihood is that they will recidivate.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Tompkins,
You're
for
welcome.
joining our conversation today. We greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to potentially looking at how we continue this dialogue to better service, all of our individuals in need. So thank you very much. And
Thank you, I really appreciate it. You folk, I have to hop off now, but you folk have a good day and stay safe.
thank you. And so we move our presentation on to Dr. Ezra Tafera.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Janelle. Thank you all for joining us today. Those were wonderful discussions, and the presentations were really enlightening. I'm really delighted to be here to discuss this important and timely topic with you all. My discussion, in a way, focuses on equitable access to technology in education. So here at the Heller School's Institute for Economic and Racial Equity, the Racial Justice X Technology Policy Program works to alleviate the challenges that hinder marginalized communities, well, of course, including access to technology and education. Today, I will try to briefly explore the intersection of education and technology and the role of technology in promoting educational equity. I will also share some of the work we are doing, which directly addresses these challenges. To begin, let's address the challenge faced by marginalized communities in accessing technology for education. These photos you are seeing right in front of you are photos of Richard Ape. He's a teacher who faces the challenge of teaching ICT without access to computers. So this teacher, to help his students, is trying to draw computer features and software features on Blackboard using multicolor chalk. One can only imagine how difficult this task is for any educator, or even for the students to comprehend and understand the concepts of those skills. As we explore these challenges for equitable access to technology in education, we often encounter the stark reality of digital divide, infrastructure limitations, and affordability concerns that hinder perhaps marginalized communities' access to technology. So students from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds or those from underserved communities often face disproportionate barriers to accessing educational resources and opportunities. The digital divide, for instance, is a significant obstacle faced by marginalized communities. This divide refers to the gap between those who have access to technology, including the internet, and those who do not. So students from underserved communities are disproportionately affected, creating an unequal educational landscape. So this goes the same for infrastructure limitations, such as the lack of broadband internet in remote areas. These situations further exacerbate the already existing disparity. Moreover, affordability concerns also act as a barrier, as many students and their families struggle to afford even the basic necessities and necessary devices such as computers, internet services, and advanced technological tools like AI tools that are becoming more popular for education these days, which further amplifies the disparity in equitable access to these vital resources. So this disadvantage puts these students behind their peers. So the challenge extends beyond just access disparities in technological tools and just the services, but it also manifests in unequitable access to technology and skills necessary to utilize these tools. One indication of this is the extreme homogeneity of the STEM industry, with only Black and Hispanic workers representing less than 10% of the workforce, and they still continue to be underrepresented in this field. We feel like this is a tremendous indicator of the current situation of the workforce. So the Racial Justice X Technology Policy Program recognizes these challenges and these impediments and is dedicated to developing innovative solutions. As highlighted earlier by Dean Madison, one of such solutions is our proposed micro-credentialing program. These micro-credentials provide flexibility, affordability, and relevancy to learners from such communities. They will equip early career and mid-career professionals, as well as pre-college students, especially students from BIPOC communities, with the necessary skills and knowledge to join the STEM fields, which will contribute to ultimately balance the now homogeneous workplace. And also it will enable them to implement racial justice and technology policy initiatives effectively. So learners will be better equipped to address challenges associated with technological advancements, such as the ones mentioned by Dean Madison, such as algorithmic biases, and so on. So I will share a few examples of those proposed micro-credentials that tie into these discussion topics. So one of these micro-credentials is the RJxTP AI and machine learning anti-bias. So in an era where algorithms and machine learning systems play a significant role in our lives, it is vital to address biases and discrimination. So this micro-credential will empower learners to understand and mitigate biases in AI and machine learning algorithms, promoting fairness and equity in their implementation. Another great example is the RJxTP GIS, or the RJxTP Geographic Information System micro-credential. These GIS systems are powerful tools for data analysis and visualization. So you can imagine, by offering this micro-credential, we can enable learners to leverage GIS technology to address racial disparities in access to resources, for instance, identify patterns in inequality, and or develop targeted interventions. To add to that, the RJxTP program also actively addresses the disparity in technology access by directly assisting communities in obtaining necessary technological tools, such as computers and internet connectivity. So just to mention one example, through our partnership with the Move Up Global program, we successfully introduced approximately 250 students, including user and mid-career professionals, the concept of understanding algorithms and bias during our phase one of our initiative in 2021 and 2022. So notably, two of our target populations initially lacked access to computers or even the basic internet connections and broadband. However, as of 2023, both groups have acquired computers and are in the process of obtaining broadband connectivity. The second topic I want to address today is the technology's role in promoting educational equity. I want to emphasize that, so to see the brighter side of things, there is a transformative potential for technology in bridging the educational gap and creating inclusive learning environment when, of course, used equitably. So undoubtedly, technology has incredible power to bridge the educational gap and promote racial justice by providing equitable access to quality education. And of course, if used equitably. It can allow students from marginalized communities to access educational resources, which would be unattainable for them under normal circumstances. It can also connect them with experts, such as those in higher institutions, and may also allow collaboration with peers, regardless of their physical locations, which are also the pros of these technologies. Furthermore, technology, if used properly, enables the creation of inclusive learning environments that cater to the diverse needs of students. It provides personalized learning experiences, accommodate different learning styles, and also offers educators adaptive assessments, ensuring every learner has an opportunity to thrive and to grow. So the RJxTP program perfectly aligns with these objectives by empowering scholars and tech experts as well as educators to champion equity through their work. So the proposed micro-credentials as seen in Dean Madison's flowchart, such as the digital culture or the intercultural competency, or as Dean Madison called it, the intercultural humility, foster a deeper understanding of cultural diversity and its importance of inclusive design. So by equipping educators, whether it's K-12 educators or higher institution educators and their students with the knowledge to create culturally responsive technology solutions, we can certainly ensure that technology is accessible and also meaningful for all learners, regardless of their backgrounds. The third and final topic I want to discuss about is on leveraging technology for racial equity. First, I want to acknowledge the importance of private and public initiatives that address racial disparities in education, in educational access, and improve digital literacy. These initiatives play a significant role in narrowing the technological access gap, improving digital literacy, and also fostering innovative teaching methods that promote equity. For instance, organizations that provide low-cost or free devices or internet access to students from disadvantaged backgrounds, or we can mention government initiatives like the Internet for All, which is President Biden's initiative to increase broadband access for poorer communities. These we should recognize are vital in narrowing the inequality gap. So these timely initiatives and partnerships contribute to narrowing the digital knowledge gap. And the RJxTP program embraces these goals by nurturing an interdisciplinary, multicultural community of scholars and tech experts dedicated to promoting equity through technology. For instance, the proposed micro-credential course on Holocaust and mass atrocities prevention can equip learners with the knowledge to address historical injustices and also promote social justice in the age of this digital era. So understanding the past allows us to shape the future, where technology plays and will play a positive role in racial equity if used properly. Additionally, all the proposed micro-credentials are designed to ensure comprehensive learning experiences. They will be offered through a hybrid instructional method, which is going to be combining an in-person intensive learning or lectures and workshops with online activities. As mentioned before, this approach allows not just flexibility and accessibility, but it also provides a robust educational foundation. So digital literacy programs will also be implemented to empower learners with the skills necessary to navigate the digital world. So furthermore, innovative teaching tools and platforms are being developed to incorporate culturally relevant contents diverse perspectives and inclusive pedagogies, ensuring that education caters to the unique experiences and needs of all students. So in this regard, the RJxTP program emphasizes the importance of inclusive design and culturally responsive technology solutions to meet the diverse needs of all learners. So by understanding the challenges that we have been discussing about faced by these marginalized communities in accessing technology and leveraging technology to promote educational equity, we can align with the program's goals. So inclusive design principles will help us or will guide us in developing technology that is accessible to individuals with different abilities, backgrounds, and circumstances. So in conclusion, the challenges to equitable access to technology in education are significant, of course. However, technology itself has the power to bridge the gap and promote educational equity. So by leveraging technology efficiently and equitably, we can address racial disparities, improve digital literacy, and foster innovative teaching methods that promote equity. So the RJxTP programs, micro-credentials, in a way, are good examples that can serve as a catalyst for change. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to engaging in future discussions on these critical topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tafara, for your wonderful presentation and giving us great insight onto the impact technology can have and why it's an increasingly needed resource and tool for everybody in order for everybody to advance. Next, we have our young presenters, Kalia Casterlo and Isaiah Young, who will be talking about the inequities in K through 12. So let me just share my screen for a second to get their presentation ready. Sorry. Hold on 1 second. Let me make sure it's pulled up. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kalia and Isaiah.
Hi. I hope everybody can hear me. If you can't, just let me know in the chat box. But I am Kalia Cashlow, and this is my lovely coworker,
Isaiah Young.
And today we're going to be talking about the education inequality scandal in Massachusetts, but we're going to be talking specifically about Danvers High and Melrose High.
We'd like to begin by telling you a little bit more about our high schools. Danvers High School is a predominantly white suburban school. Due to this fact, Danvers has a larger budget than most schools in Massachusetts. Thanks to that larger budget, students access to more resources, classes, and programs. These classes and programs better allow students to be prepared for college and give them better opportunities for the world ahead. Per pupil, on average, Danvers in 2021 spent $18,000. And in total, during 2020, they spent $23 million on teachers' salaries. And during the 2020 MCAS, 61 students passed or exceeded their standardized English arts test, 47 passed or exceeded their mathematics test, and 52 passed or exceeded their science and technology test.
Good. Okay, so a little about Melrose High School. But I would just like to begin to say I went to Boston Public Schools from around kindergarten to 5th grade, 6th grade-ish. So like switching automatically from Boston Public to a predominantly white high school was something completely different for me. But Melrose High School was a predominantly white suburban school. It was located about 30 minutes to 45 minutes from the inner city of Boston. With that being said, Melrose schools had a significantly lower budget than most schools in the surrounding area, especially Danvers. Unfortunately, because of the budget being so low, we really didn't have access to better resources. And you'll get to see that when we get into like the classes that we were able to take and all of that other good jazz. But only the core classes were really an option. As far as programs and the variety, it was extremely, extremely slim. And although we did have like an excellent graduation rate, our graduation rate was 98% and our college acceptance rate was, I believe, 53.1 out of 100. I can't help but think that we were still like unexperienced when going into college and just being in the real world. If you look to the right, you see that you read, which one did you read? This one? Mm-hmm. Mine was significantly lower. I'm pretty sure it was like 4,000 or a little bit over 4,000. I only had 14,565 total per pupil. And then my salary was also $18,000. So you can imagine how that 18 million, I'm sorry.
No.
18 million. So you can only imagine how much that really impacted our schools and our teachers.
There's clearly disparity between Danvers High School and Melrose High. As you can see, the Danvers spends $4,000 more per pupil than Melrose did in 2021, and spent nearly $6 million more on teachers' salaries, which is a considerable amount, considering that the average salary for Danvers was around $92,000, and I think the average salary for Melrose that year was around 72 or no, yeah, 72,000, and that clearly has a effect on our high schools. Yeah. During, as you can see, this is each bullet point is what our high school offered. So obviously Danvers focused on the core curriculum, but they also offered numerous other courses to prepare students for the world. Many of these courses are required for graduation, and so most students leave Danvers High School with some sort of additional skill than just their basic Common Core. Some of these skills include TV production, architecture and CAD, business, marketing, civic engagement courses, a force responder course, digital photography, and ceramics and arts. Other courses included DECA, which is something I'll touch on a little later when I talk about my personal experiences.
Alrighty. As you can see, the classes that we were only really available for us was, your basic classes: STEM, English, social studies, world languages, health, and art. I would also like to add that a lot of schools are not like our schools. We had to do about 68 hours of community service outside. So they wanted to know like how we were outside of school rather than just in and just, being book smart. But, the main focus was just to make sure that we understood the core classes at hand. And in addition to that, there was not really much wiggle room in the budget, as I said before, to add any extracurriculars other than, sports and like the basic things that you need. And you can tell the similarities, but there are very, very, very major differences when it comes to our schools, and it shows in our standardized testing and so forth and so on.
I'd like to touch a little bit on my personal experiences attending Danvers High School. So Danvers High School offers a extracurricular club called DECA, and DECA is basically a business simulation club that allows students to attend and compete at district, state, and then international level conferences in different categories in business. And so DECA has been for me personally a very good experience, as it's helped me build up professionally and how to speak better in public, how to present better, and how to better allow myself to behave in a more professional sense. But not every school has an opportunity like that. I know for a fact that a school like Everett doesn't have DECA, and so their students don't have the opportunity to engage in DECA and compete and network and grow in a professional sense.
So for a little bit of my personal experience, again, that was my first time being in a predominantly white school, and it's not even just about the race of it all. It was really more so like, because our budget was so low and because we didn't have like access to like Ivy League schools and whatnot, we were not able to have even classes that taught systemic racism. And if we did, it wasn't into the depth that we needed to. So it was like I was still missing something educational wise that I could have put into the world while attending my high school. But I do want to get into one of the solutions that I did have. I'm currently working with Ms. Janelle on creating a curriculum for the young students. So I'm trying to gear it towards like 6th graders towards the 12th grade, because that's the core time that they need to learn. We're going to be talking about the importance of learning American history and shaping that, and how that can shape them into better leaders, but especially more efficient leaders in our community. Because I don't know if you guys notice, our younger generation deserves to learn the importance of their history as well as others, because right now there's a lot of disconnect and not really paying attention to how history shapes the new generations and shapes the new minds of the world. And if we continue to not teach them that, or not teach them correctly, like not even the book smart way, but like if we just don't teach them correctly, then we're just going to continue to have this disconnect all throughout life. And we are trying to make it better for the new generations and make sure that they have more open-mindedness when it comes to situations like this, so we can bring it into schools and have more conversations without biases and more conversations without any judgment of what anybody has gone through, because everybody in life, regardless if you're brown, black, blue, purple, you have went through something traumatic, and like it needs to be talked about in school. And then I'm going to pass it over to Alex.
Before you go, Isaiah, I see we have a hand raised.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and your comments and observations, Kelly, as well as the, positive story and what's working. I'm curious, Isaiah, is history taught at your school, or in what way do you feel that issues of the role of structural racism is or isn't taught, or does or doesn't play a role in?
I can speak about this very confidently because of my research trip to Alabama and the Legacy Museum. I can confidently say that history is definitely taught at Danvers High School, but is it the true history of America? No, it's not. We get Danvers High School gets a very whitewashed version of American history that leaves out a lot of our, how do I say, a lot of the things that we did wrong. Obviously, we talk about slavery, but we don't talk a lot about its after effects on America and how it has a long-lasting impact. And so we don't really get to talk about that stuff. And even classes, there are classes that are offered that do talk about stuff like that, but they never seem to get enough enrollment in Danvers High School, so they never run. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have other questions, but I'd love to hear the rest of your presentation before I ask you about how everybody viewed the rollback of affirmative action. Now, I'll wait to ask that.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to end with leaving you guys a few questions to think about. Which school is better, Danvers or Melrose? Is the way the state determines what a good school is correct? And does the data they use tell the true story of what a high school is really like? Does it tell the true story of how good a high school really is?
And should the state be able to give those percentages and their opinion? Because the state, what we learned is in statistics, what he just told me is basically that you can lie about any number, you can lie about any information just to make the school or the environment look better than what it is. But is it truly the truth? And should we allow the state to be the people to push that upon the community?
According to like every standardized testing statistic that we have access to, and every Massachusetts school ranking list, Melrose is considered the far superior school. But it's clear from talking that Danvers better prepares their students for the future. As I liked what Sheriff Tompkins said earlier about opportunity and education, providing opportunity to their students. Danvers very much provides opportunity to all of their students, even like requiring students to take different courses to like better teach them a skill like coding or like architecture or even civic engagement. When doing this presentation, writing this presentation, we had a lot of talks. And one thing that I noticed, which was quite sad, because I really enjoyed these courses in Danvers High School, were civic engagement courses, where we as a community or a class engaged, we found a problem in Danvers High and Danvers in the community and did something about that, or went out in the world and did a food drive. A lot of those courses aren't offered at other places like Melrose High School. And so we have more access to opportunities at Danvers.
Hmm.
Thank you very much. And I know, Jasmine, you had your hand up to ask a question.
I did. Thank you so much. So I'm Jasmine Ramon. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the town of Danvers. So I do know Isaiah well. I think a question I had for both of you, it's interesting, right? Because when you list out the opportunities, it's clear one school has more. I was curious if anything in your findings kind of indicated the degree to which students take advantage of those opportunities. Because when I think about all of the offerings in Danvers, and then I think about the students that I am interacting with, you know, on the one end of the spectrum, you have the Isaiahs who are aware of everything and just grabbing everything by the, like a bull by the horns. But then I know there are other students also in Danvers High School, particularly students of color, who beyond maybe their affinity group are not accessing these opportunities to the same degree. So I'm just curious from both of you, whether it's anecdotally or something you had looked into, or what your thoughts might be in terms of, because perhaps maybe in Melrose that has less offerings, but across the board, you're seeing more students take hold of what they do have. So I'm just curious about that.
So we didn't look at that part, but I do have like a personal, like the only class that we were allowed to take, I'm pretty sure it was extracurricular, was African American Studies. And even that class, it was taught by a white professor, and only the classes had one white kid in it, and the majority of it was Black and brown. So and even with that, I feel like they didn't take it seriously enough. Like the class was full, but it's like I feel like we're desensitized towards learning American history to the point that we think it's a joke. So like we joke about everything and we look at everything, but we want change, but it's not clicking for especially our generation, from my personal experience. So I would feel like the percentile is very, very low, especially for Melrose High School.
I can say, again, we didn't find much research on that because it was quite hard to find data on specific courses and programs, because the data that we're using didn't really talk about any specific like courses that like any of the high schools offered. It was more about programs, but that's another thing. I can personally say that your assessment's correct. There's a big, in my opinion, there's a big divide between like white students and students of color in Danvers, and involvement in their community and access to resources, because I think it speaks more to the culture of Danvers than the access, like the genuine access they have. It's just they are in a sense alienated from all the other, like from club activities, from all these other opportunities. Because the reason I know about all these opportunities is because I had good mentors and good teachers in place who like took time to like teach me about things and like put me in the rooms where I needed to be. But students of color have a harder time building that relationship with teachers in Danvers High School. I can only think of like a few teachers, like considerably less than the white students. There's only a few teachers that really try their hardest to interact with students of color and try to really engage them in not only the community, but getting them the full resources they need at Danvers High School. Are there any more questions?
I have one, unless there's someone else. I'll wait my turn.
I only have one question. I wanted to ask how the student and faculty diversity has actually affected the teaching learning process in your respective schools.
Jeez, Ezra. Ask that one more time. I promise I'll have an answer. One more time.
So my question is, both your high schools are white dominated schools, and I know there's little to diversity in the school's faculty as well. So how does the student diversity and the faculty diversity affected, in a good way or in a bad way, your learning teaching process?
I mean, I can say for a fact that because we don't have many teachers of color in Danvers High School, there's not many like role models of color in Danvers High School. There's I think at most 2 teachers of color, and so there are not many, like inside of the Danvers community, there's not many teachers that you can look to and say like, this teacher is a person of color and they're a role model for me. I want to be like them. And so I think that plays a huge impact on the way we view the world. I think if you're not really taking the time to be educated about like DEI and racism, systemic racism, you build up a lot of implicit bias from your own experiences. And if you live in a community where most of your teachers or most of the people you see in power are not people of color, then you're going to start associating positions of power with white people.
That was a good answer.
Oh, thank you.
For me, I would say it affected me only in the sense that I felt like I had to do a lot of stuff by myself, because me living so far away, I couldn't get like the teacher student bond that I needed to like really succeed. So because my freshman year and my sophomore year were not the best years for me, because I switched from seeing all Black teachers every single day to switching to all white teachers who expect you to be like above and beyond because you're like one of the only Black kids in the classroom. So like it was a lot of pressure because I had to make myself better than my peers to seem like I was different and to seem like I was actually trying my hardest to be like, I don't know, like trying my hardest to prove or like be even remotely looked at as the same light as half of my peers.
I unfortunately do not know this professor's name, but they spoke briefly earlier about education and not only having your body there, but your experiences and your soul there. And I think the teacher and student connection is very, very powerful, and it can lead you to success in many different ways, but you need to have that teacher-student bond. And I feel as though that in predominantly white suburban schools, for students of color, I can't speak for them personally, but from what I've seen, it seems as though they have a harder time building up that student-teacher bond because there is a divide. There's a divide between understanding, and teachers, for some reason, don't take as much care. And I think it's a culture thing. But is there any more questions?
Yes, one more.
Thank you, Ezra.
It's a wonderful comment in chat from Susie. Do you want me to share that, Susie, or do you want to?
So I read the question, Susie, thank you for putting that in. And so I do a lot of work alongside Jasmine Ramon, who's the DEI director for the town of Danvers. I actually do some consulting for Danvers Public Schools, mainly the high school. So they have Isaiah and his other peer, Ava Newton, who is on the call. Wave, Ava, thank you. Will be able to share all of this with their school. They actually hold professional development sessions for the teachers at the end of the summer. So a lot of this will be presented during that professional development session at the end of August. They did one last year and they will be doing another one again this year.
And I just want to add an immense amount of appreciation for the work that you've done, how you both showed the comparative analysis in such a thoughtful and yet intimate way, including your own personal experiences. And I don't know if I could have been that earnest when I was back your age, which was probably a good 40 years ago, but it takes, an infinite amount of courage to describe the experiences of race in predominantly white high schools, and that is impactful to us administrators who are trying to make change. So thank you for sharing from your heart and as well from your brilliant minds. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I have one final comment that I didn't really consider, but I've been thinking about. Obviously, there's a disparity between Melrose and Danvers, and even Melrose is a predominantly white suburban school. Now think of the disparity between Danvers and an urban school, or Danvers and a rural school. The disparity would be even wider, and you can already see that there's a huge disparity between Danvers and Melrose. So think of just how large the disparity between Danvers and another school could be. That's really worrisome, and I hope that the work that we do, this internship, and the work that the RJxTP team is doing can fight against that inequality and break down that gap.
Thank you. That's a great summary of what I think all our panelists were aiming to describe and define, that the gap is immense. And though there's been progress over, centuries supposedly, and certainly there has been progress, that gap remains and in some senses widens, to your point. Hopefully what we're all proposing is this improvement of mobilizing our social capital to embrace an improved 21st century. And to do that requires talking about race, it requires talking about structural racism, it requires diversity, it requires increasing our ability to face all the challenges that you all went through high school and came out so brilliantly. You went through a pandemic, and now you're also coming through this AI transformation in how we study and how we work. So I do gain quite a bit of optimism by hearing your insights and recommendations. It also is sad as well, because the difficulties that you're describing, we've known since Plessy versus Ferguson, we've known since Board v. Ed, we've known since regulated segregation and de facto or de jure segregation. We've known we need to dismantle the reasons why that segregation persists, and now even the Band-Aid to fix it through affirmative action and other bandages like busing are insufficient. So you've given us some great suggestions. Hopefully racial justice tech policy can roll out with the great leadership of both Janelle and Azra, whom you've heard from, by reaching the pipeline of students from high school through mid-career to talk about race, transforming the educational system, introducing people to the impact of AI in everything we do, and algorithms and technology, and take charge and become either the policy analysts, the politicians, or people who influence our families and our communities. I see that in both of you, that you're change makers. So thank you again.
Thank you. And I am just going to briefly end our conversation. I thank everyone who has stayed past time today. I know we were supposed to end at 3:30, so I thank everyone for continuing to listen into the conversation. And so I'm just going to sum up, collectively what we've heard from every presenter. There's a need to close the gap. There's a need to ensure that education is accessible to everybody. There's a need for strong relationships in the lives of every young person. And in order to get them prepared for the fourth industrial revolution that we are currently in, it takes everyone. And it takes everyone knowing the significance in understanding the true foundational history of our country and where that's going. So Ezra was kind enough to drop the link in the chat to the micro-credentialing. We will be launching this summer with many more to come. But for those who are within the educational field or who are working with young people each and every day, the education micro-credentialing that we will be offering, titled The Past and Future of American Education, and understanding that education is a living organism that needs to continuously change with each generation of young people that we work with, because our environment, as we have learned, continues to shift and change, and everybody had to adapt to the pandemic and life after the pandemic. That means our education and how we innovatively teach and reach young people have to look differently as well in order for them to be successful. And in order for them to be the young men and women we want them to be within our future decision makers who will be making policy, who will be doing and leading research, we want them to be as well prepared as possible, because they'll be making decisions for all of us at one point or another. And that's going to be critically important as we age. And so I thank everybody for this conversation. I thank everyone who was a part of the presentation and speaking and owning their truth in terms of where we are, where we were, and where we need to go. And so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email myself or Ezra Tefera, who's on this line, and we will continue to update everyone who has registered with the launch of the micro-credentialing that will be happening the end of this month. So thank you everyone for joining us today.